The consensus narrative focuses on kinetic threats, carrier groups in the Taiwan Strait, drone swarms over domestic soil. This is a deliberate misdirection. The first shot in the next war will not be a missile launch. It will be an act of profound silence, a strategic severing of the system's central nervous system. Analysts at CSIS confirm over 95% of all global data and financial transactions, trillions of dollars per day, travel not through the air, but through a few hundred fiber optic cables on the ocean floor. This is the material reality of the US-led system. It is not an empire of ideas. It is an empire of cables. The asymmetric vector is not to sink a carrier, but to blind it. A non-kinetic attack, severing key undersea cables or blinding critical satellites, instantly renders the world's most advanced military a blind leviathan. A multi-trillion-dollar asset, disconnected from its data stream, becomes a floating liability. Its kinetic power is nullified without the signal to guide it. This is the protocol. The economic attack, like the BRICS de-dollarization initiative, erodes solvency. The silent attack on infrastructure paralyzes the response. It forces the incumbent power, stripped of its financial and information leverage, into a corner. The only remaining option becomes a kinetic launch-on-warning posture, a disproportionate act of violence to prove it is not, in fact, blind and helpless. The balance sheet crisis becomes the direct vector for a battlefield crisis. The motive for systemic conflict is never ideology. It is solvency. When a state's domestic liabilities exceed its capacity to pay, it faces two choices: default and collapse, or export the crisis through kinetic action. The war is a balance sheet transaction by another name. Weakness is the accelerant. Analysts at RUSI have established a direct protocol. A state facing terminal domestic liability from an unpopular war or a currency collapse is mathematically incentivized to pivot to external conflict. This is not aggression. It is a solvency event. The goal is to restructure the terms of its own survival by force. This is the asymmetric vector now targeting the US-led system. As non-kinetic attacks erode its foundational solvency, what Banking News reports as the BRICS de-dollarization initiative, the options narrow. The dollar's decline is a direct attack on the system's primary asset. When a system's economic leverage is neutralized, the liability for maintaining hegemony is transferred. The burden shifts from the treasury to the military. Economic decay shortens the fuse to kinetic conflict. This isn't a policy choice. It is a structural certainty. This protocol is visible in flashpoints where finance dictates force. Greenland's economic crisis directly undermines U.S. strategic goals. The Taiwan Strait crisis is framed as a regional challenge, but its core is a zero-sum economic competition for systemic dominance. The pivot is already priced in. As economic options evaporate, the incumbent power is forced to double down on its final irrefutable asset: disproportionate force. Defense Scoop confirms the U.S. military's first kinetic drone swarm exercise. This is the end game of a solvency crisis. When the balance sheet is broken, the only remaining leverage is the battlefield. The central vector for systemic collapse is not ideology. It is the brutal economics of lethality. The entire protocol of asymmetric escalation hinges on a single, irrefutable cost-benefit analysis. Analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, puts the numbers in stark relief. A legacy kinetic platform, like a main battle tank, represents a $5 million liability. The asset designed to destroy it is now a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a simple budgetary issue. This is the mathematical formula for the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal force has collapsed. State-level military dominance, built on decades of expensive R&D and industrial might, is being rendered obsolete by cheap, commercially available technology. The U.S. military's own exercises with kinetic drone swarms are not a sign of innovation. They are a sign of panicked adaptation to this new inverted battlefield economy. Every expensive legacy asset becomes a high-value target with a negative return on investment. The solvency of a superpower is bled dry, not just by sanctions or currency attacks, but through attrition by 1,000 cheap cuts on the battlefield. The adversary no longer needs to match your budget. They only need to exploit your balance sheet. This shortens the fuse. As the kinetic cost of maintaining hegemony becomes unsustainable, the system is forced toward a launch-on-warning posture, where any threat must be met with disproportionate preemptive force. The balance sheet crisis becomes the direct vector for a battlefield crisis. The protocol of asymmetric escalation is not theoretical. It has designated staging grounds. These gray zone theaters are the proxy laboratories where the solvency of the U.S.-led system is stress-tested to failure. They are selected for their inherent fragility and strategic value, creating a perfect storm of economic liability and military flashpoints. Consider Greenland. Official reports from CSIS detail how its severe economic crisis directly overshadows and undermines U.S. strategic ambitions in the Arctic. This is not a random event, it is a vector. Adversaries exploit this economic vulnerability as a low-cost, non-kinetic weapon. The U.S. is forced to either subsidize the failing local economy or risk its strategic position, converting a balance sheet problem into a national security liability. The primary theater, however, is the Taiwan Strait. This is no longer just a regional challenge. It is the central node of the asymmetric escalation protocol. As stated in reports analyzing the BRICS strategy, every move towards de-dollarization applies non-kinetic pressure on the U.S. system. This pressure is then focused on choke points like Taiwan, forcing the U.S. Navy to bear the kinetic cost of maintaining a financial system under siege. The math is brutal. As the economic leverage is eroded, the system defaults to its final form of leverage, overwhelming force. According to Defense Scoop, the U.S. military has now conducted its first kinetic drone swarm exercises on American soil. This is not a drill for a foreign war. It is the blueprint for asset liquidation when the spreadsheets turn red. The system is rehearsing the final step of the protocol, converting a solvency crisis into a battlefield solution. The doctrine is designated launch-on-warning. It is a protocol of mathematical certainty inherited from the Cold War. The logic is irrefutable. If early warning systems detect an incoming strategic launch, the only viable response is to execute a full retaliatory strike before the adversary's assets impact. To wait for absolute confirmation is to forfeit the ability to respond, ensuring total defeat. It is a pre-calculated kinetic trap. This analog protocol, however, now operates on a fragile digital chassis. This creates the fog of digital war, a systemic vulnerability repeatedly modeled by analysts at CSIS and RUSI. An adversary does not need to fire a single missile. A targeted cyber attack or an advanced electronic warfare platform, such as the kinetic drone swarms the U.S. military itself is now exercising, source number 4, can blind the system. The objective is not destruction, but ambiguity. It is designed to simulate the signature of a launch. This digital fog forces the commander into a zero-sum dilemma. The radar is blind. The satellite feed is dead. Is this a system failure or are hypersonic weapons minutes from impact? The protocol demands a launch. To hesitate is to gamble with national solvency. The liability for this decision is absolute. Launching on a ghost signal initiates global conflict. Failing to launch against a real attack guarantees annihilation. The commander is trapped by the protocol. This is the end game of the asymmetric escalation. As non-kinetic attacks erode the foundational solvency of the U.S.-led system, a process detailed in reports on BRICS de-dollarization, source number 1, the state's tolerance for risk collapses. A power facing a balance sheet crisis with its hegemony challenged from Greenland, source number 2, to the Taiwan Strait, source number 3, cannot afford the luxury of doubt. Economic decay shortens the fuse to military conflict, making a solvency crisis the direct vector for a battlefield crisis. The math is brutal. The cost of kinetic action becomes the only leverage left. The protocol of asymmetric escalation dictates a clear sequence. As challengers, such as the BRICS Consortium, weaponize economic policy to erode the dollar's foundational solvency, the liability for system stability is transferred. The mechanism is a mathematical certainty. Economic decay shortens the fuse to military conflict. A balance sheet crisis becomes the direct vector for a battlefield crisis. The incumbent power is forced into a corner where its only remaining leverage is disproportionate kinetic action, a response an adversary can predict and exploit. Therefore, before a primary systemic shock is initiated, Adversaries must calibrate the incumbent's response protocol. This requires a test, a non-lethal, attribution-impossible event designed to measure two variables: time to attribution and political will to escalate. The objective is not to cripple, but to collect data on the defender's launch-on-warning posture in the non-kinetic domain. CSIS analytics confirm that critical infrastructure nodes, particularly those with built-in plausible deniability, like deep-sea assets, are the optimal targets for such a probe. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a calibration shot. The specific event will be a multi-day disruption of transatlantic data flow originating from a seismic anomaly or equipment failure in the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. This leverages Greenland's known economic and geological instability as a cover, echoing reports from Vision Times on the region's volatility. The blackout will sever key financial and logistical data streams, timed to coincide with a period of market stress. The official cause will remain inconclusive. Its true purpose is to quantify the exact threshold where a solvency crisis triggers a kinetic response.